Good evening, everyone. It is 7:34. Thank you for joining us for this special Facebook Live segment. I'm Karen Swensen, along with Mike Perlstein, our eyewitness investigator and part of the Down the Drain team. We're going to be talking specifically about the Sewage and Water Board this evening and how they responded to today's storm and then the approaching system headed our way. So we would encourage you to send us your questions about whatever is troubling you this evening about the Sewage and Water Board, whether it be specific to your neighborhood or the system itself. So make sure to send us your questions on Facebook. But we've been talking about this today. Ghassan Korban, the head of the Sewage and Water Board, fielded a bunch of questions today and said it worked at optimum capacity today. Do you agree?
Well, he gave some pretty strong assurances, and we won't really know the full tale until we see pumping station logs, which show what pumps were working and when. It's a complex system, and Korban stated that 118 out of 120 pumps are operational. Of course, that does not mean that all of them are on at any one time. Usually there's sort of a sequence in which the pumps are turned on as the water gets moved from one pump station through a canal to another pump station and ultimately out to either the lake or on a few pumps to the river. What we did see was something that for a lot of people uptown, mid-city, Gentilly, and even Tremé, French Quarter, not so reassuring that it flooded. It flooded in some cases not just street, but into their cars and homes. And the water stayed for several hours. So there were a lot of questions, and I drove around and I got blocked by water repeatedly in areas that traditionally don't flood so easily. So I do think that our down the drain investigative team, have a lot of material to look at. There's always an after action report. The Sewage and Water Board, having sort of been on the hot seat for some time, really going back to the May 5th, 2017 flood, which sparked our major investigation, which led to Down the Drain. We have seen a troubling sequence of more frequent flooding, and in some cases in neighborhoods that don't traditionally flood, and the water staying longer, which has led to all kinds of questions. And sure enough, we have exposed that the things that they say are working optimally aren't always so. Even today, with Ghassan Korban giving the strongest possible assurances, he did say, well, but we did have two minor problems. Some pumps went offline. We addressed those pretty quickly. So we really need to see if there was more of those kinds of problems.
So if I heard him correctly, there's 120 pumps, 118 were working, 2 then went down, so bringing it down to 116, then it went back up to 118. Is that how you interpreted that?
Right, but again, there was never a time when 118 were working. And the three big areas that need to get right are pumps, power, and manpower. So on all those three, Ghassan Korban gave assurances. The manpower, he said that they're fully staffed, and they even have some of the employees who are on standby, ready to man pump stations as needed. So it does appear that the human equation, the manpower part, is probably as close to optimal as you can get. Now, in Down the Drain, we exposed issues where they called in people too late because of floodwaters. Employees couldn't get to critical pump stations. With at least a time lapse now where things are calm before this storm that's brewing in the Gulf hits us with rain bands, that everyone should be in place. So we got the manpower box checked off, so to speak. He gave very strong assurances on the power.
Right.
They have 6 turbines. One is sort of permanently out of commission, but the other 5 are supposedly up and running, and with some redundancy. In case any of those go down, they can go to Energy Power, and they also have some generators.
And let's talk about the redundancy word, right? He used it repeatedly. For those at home that it may not be part of their jargon, in this case, it's got a positive connotation.
Yeah, you absolutely want redundancy, which simply means if you have a pump station that has 6 pumps and at any one time 5 are operating, one of those goes down, then you go to the 6th.
So you got
and
backup.
You turn that on, and it's a form of backup.
Gotcha.
Now, we've seen in the past problems have cascaded where one goes down, another goes down, and suddenly a station is crippled. Now, there's also a negative cascade effect if some critical piece in this carefully calibrated system of water getting pushed from one pump station to the next on down the line. If something in the middle of that chain goes down, everything backs up. We've seen those problems come up in the past. Let's not forget Mother's Day, which was another troubling surprise storm that so much of New Orleans flooded for so long. So there's always an after-action report. There certainly will be one, and I think
by which you can verify all of the claims.
That's correct. And these come up at Sewage and Water Board meetings. I think with a little bit of pressure, both from the public as well as our investigative reporting, there is some transparency, and we do get those logs, and we have, of course, our Down the Drain Facebook page with a lot of eagle eyes keeping a close watch on the Sewage and Water Board.
Indeed, and I noticed that we're getting some questions now, and somebody says, you would think after Katrina, the Sewage and Water Board would have the pumping stations working at 100%. Is that fair? I mean, they're at 118 out of 120. Given, for perspective, is it fair to make that allegation?
These are, first of all, very, very old machines, in some cases more than 100 years old. And it's complex machinery, and machinery breaks down for a variety of reasons. So it is probably unrealistic to expect that all of them are going to be up and running at any one given time. The key is that if there's a critical pump, that has to be a priority and get fixed right away. Now we're getting assurances that 118 out of 120 are working. That's the highest percent of working pumps that we've heard in quite some time, and yet it flooded today. So we do have to, and I want to bring this up, this is important because there are so many other factors besides those pumps. Ghassan Korban mentioned it today as a possible reason why some of these streets didn't drain as quickly as residents would have liked and expected. And that is some clogging of both catch basins, okay, those are the drains that are visible on the curbs of your street, the lateral pipes, which are relatively small pipes that take water from the catch basin to water mains that run down the middle of streets. And then you have canals. Those, in some cases, big open canals, and now we have a new set, those Sela culverts on those major perpendicular streets, Jefferson, Napoleon, Nashville streets in Uptown, are supposed to be alleviating what had been traditional problem streets for flooding in Uptown. We heard from a lot of people on those streets and in those neighborhoods saying they never had this kind of flooding prior to those culverts being completed.
So what do you glean from that? Okay. What is your question then next?
Well, the thing that we do know for a fact is that in the most recent consultant's report, they estimated that 14 to 27% loss of drainage capacity in both the catch basins, the pipes, and the canals due to debris, due to those being clogged. It's perhaps a little easier right on the surface of a catch basin, and that's why the city is always so quick to say, in your neighborhood, check your catch basin, clean it out. Then, of course, there's inside the catch basin. That's why you have those big, vacuum trucks that are supposed to be servicing the catch basins on the inside where you can't see. But what you really can't get to are those lateral pipes, which often get clogged. And now we have these giant culverts that even the culverts, relatively new, were estimated to be about 22% reduced because of debris. And this is in the Veolia consultant's report. So that was some time ago. Has the situation gotten worse? Is the amount that the capacity, the drainage capacity of those pipes and culverts reduced by more than the 14 to 27% estimate? Those obviously have to be investigated, because it does seem like we're getting more flooding more frequently. And we even heard it's a bit troubling that some people who have now been flooded repeatedly, their cars or homes, are questioning whether it's sustainable for them to stay in New Orleans, if that's going to become a regular headache.
You heard even the folks in Zulu, I mean, just so frustrated with their headquarters that, with this happening
Right.
repeatedly. And yet you also heard Ghassan Korban saying, hey, listen, no system in the country, he said, could have handled that much rain in that little period of time. A, is that true? Can we verify that? Could no system handle? And then B, does he understand that people just have a hard time buying anything that comes out of the Sewage and Water Board
And
office?
Ghassan Korban, he did meet that question head on, that the Sewage and Water Board has a credibility problem. It all goes back to, the August 5th floods of 2017, when some of the things that were said by Cedric Grant, then director of Sewage and Water Board.
And even today, Jason Williams. Yeah.
Right, but some of what he said, point blank, on our air, answering your questions, I believe, turned out to be not true. So, and a lot of that got exposed by our station and by our investigative team and down the drain. So the result of that is, first, Cedric Grant and other heads rolled. They're not there anymore and have gotten replaced. And people are skeptical, because they've seen in the past where things that were said at the highest ranks of the city and the Sewage and Water Board turned out not to be true.
People are writing in. Oh, if we could pop that up again just for a moment, I'd love to have you. Caitlin Blank writes, wow, New Orleans flooding, crazy. Not like that happens all the time or anything. Pumps can't solve all the issues. I saw another gentleman tweet something similarly, and he said, hey, they're calling this the 100-year flood. Well, then I must be 500 years old, implying that his home was flooded 5 times, in his lifetime.
Right.
It's hard to swallow.
Yeah, so it was described as anywhere, from 6 and possibly even more than 8 inches in some spots over a course of 3 hours, right. Which is a 1 in 100 chance of that happening. Well, it seems to be happening, we know now, roughly 3 times in 3 years. That seems to be a lot different than 1 in 100 years. So it does give people, I think, the right to question those statistics, number one. Number two, we will have to check the National Weather Service as far as the actual rainfall. We know that it is different, in different parts of the city. But once again, people have every, I think, right to ask those questions. We certainly will. These things tend to get answered after the fact. Right now, it's all hands on deck at the Emergency Operations Center with this tropical storm, brewing in the Gulf. Who knows what that could bring?
You mentioned the Sela culverts earlier, and Mary Ellen Martins is writing in, did they fail? Did they fail? Do we know today whether or not they did?
Well, highly unlikely that they failed. They're massive. They were billed as, being able to, you could drive a Volkswagen, Beetle through the underground culverts. And they are designed in a way that they store water so that not all the water has to be pumped right away, overwhelming the pumping and drainage capacity of the city, but it can store a certain amount of water below the surface rather than on the streets, in your car, and in your house. However, we do know from those consultants' reports that the capacity is reduced by some 22%. Now, it could be much greater than that now, many, many months after that Veolia report, with all kinds of debris, things that go down the catch basins, get clogged and stuck in there. What I think, for the system to be truly optimal, as Ghassan Korban was stating, he was using that word optimal, it's not optimal. Let's just be frank. Optimal is when every catch basin is pristine, those culverts are wide open without debris, and some people have called for a more regular maintenance schedule that was actually recommended by the consultants to ensure that what we can't see below the ground in these pipes and culverts and canals isn't clogging the system.
Let me ask you to expound on that, because we have a viewer saying you're telling your citizens to clean their own catch basins, yet we pay the city to do that. So where are they in terms of cleaning them? I mean, for a while there, they were giving us routine updates, but
look, one of the main findings in our Down the Drain expose was that many of those catch basins hadn't been cleaned for years, and that there was no regular schedule. And what happened with that? There were emergency contracts that were given for a massive cleaning effort, and we heard, at any rate, that ahead of this storm season, that there was once again, a ramping up of the cleaning of the catch basins with the vacuum trucks. But for example, I saw with my own eyes today many catch basins clogged with trash and debris. Unfortunately, there were some neighborhoods where there was garbage pickup. The floods came so fast at such an early hour of the morning that trash cans toppled over. Debris from those cans floated out into the water and clogged the catch basins in a way that really diminished the capacity, sometimes clogged them completely. So many people, seeing that in front of their homes, went out, dug up the trash, cleaned up, and the city is encouraging everyone to do that.
And you can't fault the city for that. Something like that today, the trash cans fall over and you have to go out there. But
it's going to happen.
Have we been able to verify that they have in fact stayed on top of their scheduled cleaning with the vacuums of the catch basins? Can we verify that?
That's a good question. We don't know I guess there was some, at least claim that there was going to be a major ramping up prior to this hurricane season. We're just kind of getting into hurricane season,
Of course.
And that's a good question for us to check. I'm glad that viewer posted that, because I think given what happened today, I think that's a very valid question. Where are we in terms of the catch basin cleaning? Now, again, not just the leaves or branches that get stuck visibly above the surface at the curb, but down in the catch basin where those trucks have to lift the manhole cover and come in with the vacuum.
So we've been talking a lot about what happened today. Today's behind us. Thankfully, the worst is over. In your opinion, do we have enough time to dry out before kapow, we get hit by whatever the tropical disturbance brings us? What are you? Put it this way. What are you concerned about most?
That works against the city and this drainage system. Obviously, especially if there's some persistent bands of rain leading up to whenever we get, say, the peak of this storm, if the ground is saturated, that's just less room to absorb rain as it comes down. As we see, it does not take much. We saw today, in what really took people by surprise, major flooding throughout the city. It had a real cascade effect in traffic. Let's just say this is one of those kinds of storms where there's an urgency to evacuate. The streets were almost impassable. Streets that otherwise could have, gotten you onto the interstate to evacuate if you wanted to evacuate, those were blocked by water. So I do think that there are a lot of very legitimate concerns, because we all know the unpredictability of storms. Anything could happen, especially this storm in particular. Our weather experts have told us that there's not a defined track yet. And so I do think everyone is right to be vigilant about this one.
But given what he said, or what you were saying, the three critical elements, we've got the manpower. Is that correct? Are you confident that the numbers are there?
Yeah, pretty confident. And again, we certainly have enough lead time for anyone who normally would be on standby or to pull the longer 12-hour shift, can get called in and be ready for whenever these bands start to hit us in whatever form this storm takes. So that sounds like that's covered.
Power?
The power, if they say the 5 turbines are up and running, and some of the glitches that have popped up, like kind of surprising us as we did this deepest of investigations, the one thing we never heard, because it never came up, was, oh, by the way, turbine 4, one of their biggest turbines, just recently repaired, doesn't work below 45 degrees. That came up in a recent storm. But now we have obviously no threat of that. We're in quite warm weather, so they say that the 5 turbines, more than enough power to work all these pump stations. That sounds solid.
And we've got the pumps.
Pumps can get taxed. They've been taxed today by this event. And if there's a sort of a continuous multi-day rain event, things are going to break. This is 100-year-old machinery, and that's probably the most vulnerable area.
All right, and so you and I are both residents of Orleans Parish. We understand the frustration. We hear it from our neighbors. We experience it probably on our own families. It's one thing to be frustrated. It's another thing. Here's what we're faced with right now. We've got something approaching us. What can we do? Is there anything beyond clearing our catch basins that we can do? We might be frustrated that the city's not doing it. They haven't had the time to come out to our neighborhood. But at this point, so what? So be it. We just have to. We don't want our own streets to flood. So what do we do?
Sure.
Just the catch basins? Is that the only thing that's really within our power?
So right now there isn't a lot that citizens can do. The catch basins, like I had said, that's the visible
right.
thing
We
that
can go out there
an
and do
individual can see that in front of their home or on their block. Things that are deep underground or that are, machinery manned by the Sewage and Water Board, it's probably as good as it's going to get.
Right.
In the front of this particular storm. We do hope that our reporting on Down the Drain, vigilance by viewers, and we have hundreds of people on our Facebook page, and I encourage other people to join in. The Down the Drain Facebook page is very active with concerned citizens who point out problems, suggest solutions. Some of these are the same people who show up at Sewage and Water Board meetings, and that's being taken quite seriously. You have an agency basically under a microscope since that 2017 flood.
And there's a lot of rumors out there, there's a lot of speculation. A gentleman named Andy's asking, is it true that we don't have enough power to run all of the pumps at once simultaneously?
Oh, they claim that they have excess power, but in the event of a storm, power can go out. There are mostly self-generated turbines that produce this 25 cycle power. Some feed off of the Energy 60 cycle power, and they claim to now have some redundancy, that word again, redundancy, in the form of generators. We will have to take the Sewage and Water Board at its word. Turbines are fickle things. We've saw one that was down for years, millions of dollars of repairs later. They say it's up and running.
Well, we certainly hope for the best, right? We're hoping they're all up and running.
That's pretty much where we are right now, is other than cleaning up the debris, having a plan. Now, let's face it, there can be weather events that overwhelm the system, even when everything is working optimally. And at that point, you have to have, a contingency plan, whether it's supplies in your home for a shelter in place, maybe a plan if an evacuation is called, to have your car gassed up, ready to go, and a route to leave the city and a place to go if it's going to be, let's say, multiple days away from New Orleans.
And to be fair, the city repeatedly offered that 311 hotline number for people who have problems that can't go out and get their own catch basin if they see a major problem. So there is that avenue. You can call 311 to report those bigger problems or the ones that you can't address. Also, if you have a special needs patient, you can do that, and they are encouraging to do that tomorrow. And there was an urgency to the mayor's voice to stay alert, to be aware of these warnings, to heed the warnings and the advice as we move forward. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Nobody knows the drainage system in this city like our Down the Drain team, so I appreciate your time.
And rest assured, we'll be keeping an eye. There'll be an after action of what happened today, whatever this storm brings over the next several days, and it looks like Sewage and Water Board, there's still a lot of digging to do to answer all these questions posed by our viewers.
We appreciate that, and we know that you'll continue to verify what they say. Also, we want to let you know that our weather team, led by Alexandra Cranford tonight, is continuing to watch that disturbance in the Gulf, and she will be continuing to offer updates online and also here on Facebook, on our website, and we'll have a special edition of the 10 o'clock news at 10 o'clock. So thank you so much for joining us for this Facebook Live segment. Have a great night.